Welcome back to another episode of helping John figure out what the heck he's thinking about in his life and mind and business. I mean, the Obvious Choice podcast. Today, Amber's going to help me kind of start to figure out what I'm thinking about for the next book.
Oh boy.
Oh boy. And there's two books that I'm excited about writing, and I probably will write both of them. I'm speaking to my agent tomorrow, most likely, about which one is best idea now. But what I thought would be really good here and helpful here is speaking about one of them specifically that's more like lifestyle, call it self-development. And, it'd be cool for you to be kind of a fly in the wall if when this thing gets published, you'd be able to see how it conceptualizes. But also, this is an example of probably the best development tool concept process that I follow, which is find a really, really smart person that you work well with and create some sort of a platform or way that you can workshop ideas with them in real time. And I mean, do it on a podcast. Don't care if anybody listens to it, but do it on a podcast if you want. It's just a really great way to develop ideas and to figure out what you're thinking about and get somebody else to tell you whether it makes sense or doesn't make sense. So I do suggest that you do that. It's been super helpful for me. If you have been following for a while, you know that the name of this podcast and the name of this book was literally figured out on this podcast. Like there was an episode very early on where we were like, this is it. We got it.
We did it.
We did it.
Will that mean that we need to rebrand the podcast based on the next book?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Although that would be funny. It's like every time the podcast changes names with whatever's book coming out. I don't think that's such a good idea. I don't know. I'd have to think about that.
Or for our entertainment.
So there's basically two books that I'm excited about writing about. And the idea that I'm going to start another book now is just batshit crazy. But I've kind of accepted the fact that I'm just a complete masochist with this type of thing. And where I'm at right now is I've submitted the book. It's in copy editing. It's going to be put into production. Like the manuscript has been accepted by our publisher, which is a big deal, which basically means they looked at the whole thing and they were just like, yeah, this is great. No further changes are needed, right? And now I have like 8 months before the book comes out in January. A little bit less than that, I guess, 7 months. And once January hits, or the couple months before then, I'll get into promotion mode for it, like heavy promotion mode. But in that meantime, it's a really good time to start the next book. And that way, hopefully, I'll be able to maintain, at least so long as I have good ideas and concepts for a book, a cadence of putting out a new book once every 2 years or so. That's kind of the idea. And the only way to really do that is to start a book once the other one is submitted. And the way the publishing contracts work is they basically don't allow you to pitch a book until your manuscript's been accepted for your previous one, which makes sense. Fair. Which is totally fair. Okay. So there's two books. So the one that we're not going to be talking about today, but that I think we'll probably write at one point, is basically, I mean, it's a book on building a scalable coaching business. The model that we've discovered with OTM, like actually to coach people with OTM and the business model and the service model, I think is the best coaching model that's ever been developed. And I've yet to find a really good resource on how to build a really scalable coaching business. It's really easy to teach people. Like there will probably be like a pre-introduction chapter to be like, if you're just getting started, here's what you need to know. Because I could tell you that in 1,500 words. Like it's really, really straightforward. But it's when you get to the point where you're like, okay, I got to grow this thing to be bigger than me. There's a lot of existential doubt, but people are hiring me. And so, if it's not me coaching them, what's going to happen is like, first of all, that's all in your head and that's not true. But then, how do you systematically start to hire? What's the profit margin you maintain? How do you maintain the service? How do you begin to develop a sales team and a sales book of leads and all of those types of things that you really don't need to know if you're just an individual coach coaching 25 or 30 people at a time. But if you want to build this thing into a multi-million-dollar coaching business, you do. Right? And so I've never come across that. So I think, I mean, it's funny because that book would be a really easy book to write, because we'd basically just pick up the stuff that we teach in OTM, and how that we teach in OTM, but we'd pick up the model for OTM and we basically make it globally applicable. And so it would be for fitness coaches, but also for business coaches and for people coaching anything, to be honest. Yeah. So there's that one, but that's not what I'm talking about. What I want to talk about today, Amber, is a concept, and this is, and I don't quite, what I'm really trying to figure out is the specific positioning of this, because I understand that how it applies for me and how I apply this general approach to life is not going to be globally applicable. But there are aspects of this that I think anybody could do, no matter where they are, no matter what their life circumstances are, to fundamentally improve the quality of their life and their work. So the concept is surrounding what I call like the 8-4 yearly cadence of living. So every year, I spend about 8 months in Toronto, and then I pick up and I leave for 4 months. And for the last number of years, it's been Mexico. But I have not had a winter in Canada in 12 years.
Smart.
It's smart if you don't like, the cold and you're soft like me and you don't like fabric that goes below your knees. But it's not really about that, right? I've thought so long and hard about why I really do this. And it's not escaping the cold of the winter. I mean, I joke about that, but it is so far beyond that. It's what I'm able to gain personally and professionally by almost compartmentalizing my year and splitting my year into buckets. And I figured out that sort of 8 months and 4 months at a time works really, really well. For other people, it might be a little bit different. But again, this is why I'm kind of like this. I could probably tell this story under the guise of like my travels and pull interesting and fun stories to illuminate the different points that I'm telling. But just as one example, that is like completely away from business. The first time that I ever went away for a long period of time was I did a semester abroad in university. So in third year university, I did my first semester of kinesiology at Vic Uni in Australia. So I did a student exchange, and I left London, Ontario, Canada, and I did a semester in Australia. And I was by myself. And there was a whole bunch of things that I learned about myself. I mean, I went from a very shy, very reserved, university kid who didn't have much confidence to like, you're by yourself, bro, on the other side of the world. I mean, this was in 2005. We used phone cards. Like I would send an email. It was not the type of hyperconnectivity at home, which meant that I was really by myself. I mean, I would buy a phone card and I would try to call my parents and we'd, maybe connect. But I certainly didn't talk to friends on the phone. Maybe we'd send emails a little bit, but there wasn't much. And I learned a lot about friendship during that period of my life. Yes, I gained a lot, in terms of confidence. I also learned that Australians are just like 10 years ahead in everything sports science. It was just laughable. Like the stuff that we were doing there and studying there, it was like became big in Canada like 10 years later. But which is why probably Australia and the sports that they care about just compared to how many people live in that country are just so good at those sports, like swimming and stuff like that. They just like wipe the floor with everybody. It's like there's like 200 people who live on this island and like 180 of you are the best swimmers in the world. But I learned a lot about friendship. And what I learned, what I was very surprised at was who I missed and who I didn't miss. Mm. there were people who I spent a lot of time with when I was in Toronto, when I was in London, Ontario, when I was in school, who I thought were really good friends. And when I went away for that period of time, I realized that I didn't think about them ever. And there were other people who I hardly spent any time with that I dearly missed. I needed to leave where I was. I needed to separate myself from where I was in order to figure out who was really important to me. And then when I got back, recalibrate where I invest my time and who I invest my time into. Not based off of who is going to be the best professional network colleague for me, based off of that impossible to describe, this person is on a much deeper level who I really miss. And that was how I started to calibrate my friends. And so I started to look into this. Aristotle actually has a ladder of friendship, and he basically has 3 stages of friends. And I can't remember the exact names of them. I have it written down, but it kind of goes like basically professional friends, like friends that are going to help you achieve. And again, there's nothing wrong with those types of friends, like colleagues, deal making friends, right? Friends where you both mutually benefit from the friendship. And then the next level are things like, I call it friends of convenience. I think what he was more referring to are like community based friends, people who are in the same religious institutions, people who you live close to, like people who your paths cross often, not because you're going out of your way for your paths to cross, but because of something else that you're involved in that they also are involved in. And so your paths cross and you're always happy to see them. And then the top level of friendship, the peak, is this kind of deep down, like almost energetic friends where I'm sure you could probably name off the top of your head 1 or 2. I mean, I have one person. You could probably name off the top of your head 1 or 2 or 3 people where you're just like, I don't even know what it is, but you could lock us in a room with dry beans and cereal and open the door a month later, and we would still be laughing our heads off.
Yeah.
And so that's the top level friends. And so that's just one example, Amber, of, this kind of 8-4. It's very hard, I'm not explaining the overall theory well because I got into that description about friends, which would probably be like, I think adult friendship is a very important thing to discuss.
Yeah, for sure. And it's hard.
And it's really hard. And it's really hard. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with spending the majority of your time with, call it like friends of convenience. Like I do. But I think it's still important to appreciate that there are going to be a few people. Like there's a bunch of studies about happiness as it pertains to friendship and how friendship in your relationships is actually the number one determinant of overall happiness in your life. It's number one above everything else. And spousal, it doesn't necessarily need to be like a husband or wife or like partner in that way, like romantic partner, but like having somebody like that and at least one other close friend seems to have a really meaningful difference. And so really it's like 2 basically great friends that you go through life with. And again, it doesn't have to be a spouse. But 2 really, really close friends. But like you don't have time mostly for 3 or 4. But let me take it back a second. So this idea with the 8-4 is really about figuring out a way to compartmentalize your life into, call it buckets, almost create your own seasons. Maybe in space, but maybe just mentally being like, this is the time that I'm going to spend on this for this amount of time throughout the year. And then I'm going to leave that and spend it on this, because it helps you. It kind of forces you to view things in a very new way. Now, I do it by literally leaving the country. And I have lots of other examples that I'm going to get into, but that's that's kind of what I'm struggling with. Is like for me, obviously, it's traveling and living abroad. Um,
Yeah.
but this isn't a book about travel necessarily.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what makes it hard is it can be applied in so many different ways that it makes it hard to nail down the snippet of it.
Yeah.
It kind of makes me think of like a broader use of like the leapfrog effect, right? Like we talk about that for like learning and shorter snippets, but this is like applied in life where you need more time, to do those things to get a different perspective. Um,
So
so it
leapfrog
kind
was
of makes me think
definitely
of that.
in there. Yeah, leapfrog was definitely in there in my notes. I mean, there's something about having a very distinct combination of rigidity and freedom that
Mm-hmm.
really feeds my brain, and being able to schedule that variety into my life, almost like the seasons, makes a big difference. Like I love Toronto was very hustle culture. I love that. I love the energy. I love the fervent energy. I love how everybody is just trying to get ahead. I love how everybody is busy. I love how there are tons of social commitments constantly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, there's just always stuff going on. There's always great music. There's always great shows. There's always professional events. There's always family commitments. I love that. But if that was my entire life, 12 months out of the year, it would break me down. It would totally burn me out and break me down.
Yeah.
So I love having that for 8 months. And then I leave and I come to Mexico where there's nothing. Like here, there's no social commitments. There's no professional commitments. There's no, call it shows or events or dinners or anything like that
Yeah.
for 4 months. And most of the people here are kind of like, I don't know, they're kind of just chilling. Like some of them have been conventionally successful and they have decided that it isn't for them anymore. Other ones have just decided to opt out of that and they work at like a little taco spot during the day and play spike ball at sunset and work out with their dog in the morning. They're the Mexican fisherman story. Like, oh, you
Yeah.
mean that I can work really hard for 20 years in corporate America so that I get to work out in the morning with my dog and then,
Maybe.
spend the day at a great taco joint and then at night play spike ball on the beach, at sunset with my friends? It's like, well, why don't I just do that now? And so there are
Yeah.
people like that as well. And so I love this lifestyle here. But again, if this was all I did, it would drive me crazy. And so by the time, I mean, I'm going home in 3 weeks and I'm like feeling that energy again. I'm like, I really kind of want that Toronto energy again. After about 4 months, I'm like, I need that now. And then by about 8 months in Toronto, I'm like, okay, I need that other side of it.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important because I've discovered, and we talk about it here, so I don't think that I'm alone, that no matter what we're doing, no matter how well chosen the task or the activity, whether it is committing time to family, whether it's committing time to work, whether it's committing time to a specific type of work, there's guilt from feeling that we should be doing one thing while we're focusing on another, even if what we've chosen to focus on is really well chosen and is 100% objectively what we should be doing. There's
Yeah.
still going to be guilt from feeling that we should be doing something else. And so, what this does is it gives me a predetermined time to focus on one thing, to focus on strengthening bonds with the family, to focus on fitness. Because I think that we can be great at many things, but we can only actively get better at one thing at a time.
Yeah.
What do you think about when I say that? Because that to me is one of the big themes is like, you can't do it all. I can't, maybe you can. I can't
No.
do it all,
No.
but I want to do it all because it's all so much fun There's so much joy, there's so much exploration, there's so much beauty, there's so much adventure, and I want to do it all. And I want to get better, and I want to get fitter, and I want to be more for my family, and I want to build a better business, and I can't do it at the same time. I can't.
Yeah.
And so I got to give seasons to each.
Yeah. Before I lose this thought, because I know I'll lose it if I don't say it. So before you start talking about this stuff, like we talked about the last podcast episode about how contrast creates value, right? And so like when you are going back and forth, you're creating space so that way when you do go back to whatever the 8-month portion is, you value it more. You are able to be more present. You don't take it for granted as much, all of that stuff. So I think purposely creating contrast periods in your life, I think is definitely beneficial. And that's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, I
You're
have,
talking
and
about.
I have written down your line from yesterday, where contrast creates value, and how in our conversation where we only feel emotion in relation to things that we've already experienced.
Yep.
That was a great. I have that all written down because I really love that. Right, the second that we finished the podcast, I basically jumped and took out my notebook and wrote down some notes.
Nice.
And often, what I'll do for anybody listening, if you're following this kind of experiment in figuring this out, I mean, you might even be able to hear me typing because I'm typing as Amber's going. But I'll sometimes ask Amber to send me the transcripts after these episodes as well, because having conversations like this recorded brings out really, really great things. And I'll go through those transcripts. I mean, think of how many times that happened in The Obvious Choice, where I remember distinctly we were having a conversation, you and Ren and myself, where we talked about, it came up like at the end of an episode, like right near the end of it. And it came up of just how poorly I chose the doctor to treat Allison when she got cancer. And our financial advisor, just how poor my decision making was. And those are pretty central stories in one of the chapters of the book. And in fact, that actually, the story about the doctor actually led the proposal for the book. So this experience of discovering in depth on a podcast or in conversation recorded and talking about these things, and then having those little magical, like, oh yeah, this connects in that way, in that very unique way at the end of like an hour conversation. Because if I remember correctly, that actually episode went long by like 15 minutes because we just got into that near the end. Led a proposal that led to a multi-six-figure book deal. And so like, that's, it's like how can you monetize this? It's like, well, you can't really directly, but what's interesting is not what you can think of by yourself. What's interesting is making connections based off of worldly experiences that are deep down in the human experience that take some time to really pull out and be like, oh yeah, this is how this connects to this theme. This is part of a bigger thing. I like that idea of purposefully creating contrasting periods in your life. I love the idea, Amber, of there's something about not getting into like the daily doldrums.
It's getting off of autopilot. I mean, how many times are we constantly like just next thing, and by the time you go to bed, you're like, wait, where am I?
What did I do? What did I accomplish? What did I do? Yeah, like avoiding the daily doldrums, getting off of autopilot. And it's entering the day excited for it because you're like, because by the time that you get to this period where you're pushing forward on this thing, you've been wanting to do it for a while, but you've also known that it wasn't the time for that. And so it's funny. So this originally, I pitched an idea to my agent a long time ago. And I remember I sent her an email and I was just like, I'm going to send you this. I'm not working on this now, but I felt like I needed to send you this. And also welcome to my brain. And, no rush to get back to me. because she's very good.
Yeah.
Like I'll get messages from her at like 9 at night, and I'm like, oh, I really didn't need you to like work at 9 at night on a
Yeah.
Tuesday. Like I sent this when I thought about it, so now I send her emails, and I'm just like, don't answer me until you have time to answer me. Like it's fine, right?
Yeah.
Um, but but I sent her this, and I said, this was before we left, obviously, but this coming winter will be my 12th in a row with 4 months abroad. We're bringing my two kids and a mother-in-law. I know a lot of people who travel. I know fewer who do it with their family. I know even fewer who have done it for as long as I have. And I don't know anybody who does it with a family who's done it for as long as we have while simultaneously running and growing a multi-million-dollar business. Like it just doesn't exist. And I said, likely September 2025, we're planning on leaving for the year. We'd rented our house, my two kids be 8 and 3. And I get asked endlessly how I do it, from the technical stuff to whatever. And I basically said, like, I wanted to. I said, I do think there's going to be a massive increase in families looking to travel with no tome, with no book telling them how or inspiring them to make the leap. I, along with Allison, so I would co-write this one with Allison, would like to write that book.
Oh,
We document a year away. And I don't actually think that that's a good book, but oftentimes when you put down an idea, when you think through this type of thing, a nugget or a kernel of a really good idea comes out of that. So
mm-hmm.
in that I said to her, I said, my life philosophy caters around three competing elements: family, health and fitness, and work. I said, call it the golden triad, whatever. Like you could easily picture it as a triangle, right? If you pull away one of them, like it's the most stable structure on the planet, but if you pull away one of them, it completely collapses. Like I think that's actually a really, really good visual for a great life. And I think that's a great visual for, strengthening. You don't ever want to take away the triangle. You can't ever ignore one of them. You need to keep that structure stable, but you can strengthen one side of it at a time. And I said the book's theme would be centered around maximizing those, with the underlying idea that we all have some combination of time, money, and health, but there's only one point in our lives when we have all three, which is around 35 to 50 years of age. And most people get so busy around this period of life with work that they miss this golden time of their lives. Because oftentimes when you're young, you have family and fitness, but you don't have money. Oftentimes, or you have sort of time and fitness, but you don't have money. Oftentimes, when you're older, you have time and money, but you don't have your health. And in the middle of your life, around like 35 to 50 years, is really the only time when objectively it's pretty reasonable to enjoy all three. But that's also the time when often there's a lot of young children, maybe aging parents, a lot of work stress. You've been promoted or you've been working long enough to have a lot of commitment, responsibility within your career. And then you wake up one day and you're 50 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And so what she said to me is, like, there's something about that idea. There's
Yeah.
there seems to be an influx of books right now, definitely about how to like really dominate midlife.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like this could be something there.
Mm. It's it's interesting because to me, like one of the reasons we work so well together is our brains work fairly similarly in a lot of ways. And so when you're describing all of this to me, like I get frustrated when people are like, well, when if you want to be more present, then do like turn off devices and da 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 da, like do all of these things, which for my brain, it doesn't work and it's infuriating. But doing something like this would almost kind of hijack the system of my brain because by setting up these different periods in my life, it creates that novelty. So my brain is more online and more present and can see and smell and enjoy everything more versus like, okay, every single day, less device time, exercise, like all of these things where it just feels like too much. And so by creating these different seasons and time periods, I'm not working so hard to be present. It's my brain naturally wants to be dialed in because of the novelty that I've purposely created.
Yeah, that idea of novelty is really interesting. It's funny because that's an aspect that I didn't really think about it that way, but I like that a
Mm-hmm.
lot. Of it's really exciting
Mm-hmm.
to get into something or to get
I
into
mean, how many,
an
I can't even tell
idea.
you how many times I've rearranged like the furniture in my house just for the change of pace, like when I
Hmm.
had furniture anyway, like, just these little changes because my brain is craving something different. And so doing it proactively and with purpose would, instead of as a almost reactionary because I'm not getting the sensory input that I need, that would be a great way to do that with better results, most likely.
So I have written down
I
here
think
in
that
my
would appeal
notes.
to a lot of. uh,
I have written down here in my notes. I mean, I'm not the one who came up with this, but it's pretty well established that the three most important decisions you'll ever make in your life are who to spend it with, where to live, and what to do for work. Probably in that order. And at the same time, those are three decisions where we often, or those are three areas where we often make a decision very, very early on in life without much life experience. And then by the time that we have that life experience to be able to better make that decision for us, there's often a lot of sunk cost involved that can be hard to overcome. You spent a lot of time with a person, or you've set up a home in a place. You've invested financially, but you've also invested time, or you've like invested into a career and education around a career. There's just a lot of sunk cost in that. And what I love about this idea of the 8-4 way of living is that it builds in constant room and space for exploration, for experience, for novelty. I just added that in with you, and for reprioritization.
Yep.
Because another part of what I do is I rebuild my schedule from the ground up twice a year.
Mm-hmm.
I have rebuilt my schedule from the ground up every single year, at least twice for the last 12 years. When was the last time you wiped your schedule clean and started from scratch? I'm not asking you necessarily, Amber. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
asking that as a question to our listeners here. When was the last time you wiped your schedule clean, reassessed your priorities, and built it from scratch? We become very, very good at adding as new opportunities come our way, while simultaneously we're really, really bad at subtracting. It's very rare that something new comes your way that you add it in, and at the same time as you're adding it in, you're thinking about what you are going to have to remove in order to add that in.
Mm-hmm.
I think about this in the metaphor of the house. I never owned a house until a couple of years ago when I realized it's the same thing. You just accumulate shit. It's like, hey, throw it in the basement. I might use it one time. You just accumulate shit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same with our schedules. We don't even think about why we're doing what we're doing or if it's right. We've just made all these commitments to ourselves, usually.
Yep.
Sometimes to our business. I mean, if you're a coach, you've made all these commitments. Oh, yeah, but I have to do these calls after this. Well, do you even know if they like them? Because
Mm-hmm.
most of the people you work with probably don't want to talk to you, as definitely not as much as you talk to them.
Yep.
They, and so there's a lot of value in this, not constant reprioritization, because I don't think that you can do it constantly. Call it like a spring cleaning, but it's
Mm-hmm.
an overall spring cleaning as you're switching these states. And I only have two states, right? Which is why this 8-4, which I found is a good cadence for me. But what does that allow me to do? Well, I've gotten really, really good at building my schedule. And every time I look at those buckets, okay, well, I've got business, I've got family, and I've got health and fitness. Well, those are three pretty important buckets to all scheduling. Most of the time in our schedules, we only have professional commitments, but I think fitness and I think family are just as important, if not more important, to build into your schedule. And what I've also discovered, and I'm not saying that it's necessarily the most important thing, but I've also discovered is that when fitness gets scheduled first, everything else seems to fall into place around it really, really nicely. That's not me saying that it's the most important thing, but I have found that as I'm rebuilding my schedule, I figure out what I'm doing for my exercise first, and I put that in my calendar first. And I find that everything else has a way of falling into place around it. But what's happened over the years is systematically, I've just had fewer and fewer things booked. To the point where now, I mean, Amber, you see my calendar.
Yes, I do.
I have nothing ever scheduled Mondays, Thursdays, and Fridays. Tuesdays and Wednesdays, we record this podcast. Every second week, I do a group call for OTM, which is always right after the recording of the podcast. And if I'm doing an interview like I'm doing right after our show today, or if I'm being interviewed or somewhere, I will almost always, I mean, I'll make exceptions, but I will almost always only book calls directly before or directly after, and no more than 2 a day.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not a business optimization exercise, but that's just, I figured out in this period of constant reprioritization that that's how I work best, is having tremendous amounts of open time to read, to dabble, to think, to write. And if I'm going to do calls, they need to be bunched together with a 15-minute break in between. And not scattered all throughout the week.
No.
And so over time, what's happened is I've just opened up more and more time in my schedule. There's basically no meetings. Because, I mean, I don't think meetings, like even professionally, I think for a lot of things. Now, if you're running a coaching business, it's a bit different. Meetings need to happen. But fortunately, Jason runs our coaching business. But it's not that. So
Well,
that's a major part of it.
Yeah, so when doing your reprioritization, it's not just to clarify, I think it's kind of implied, but
Yeah.
it's not just, okay, let me start from scratch, but let me evaluate, how has the last, X amount of period gone? What's gone well? What hasn't gone so well? What felt sticky? What, where did I have resistance? And so that's, over years of doing that, you figured out how to best use your time, not just, by having less, but by, even just grouping them together when you're going to be in the right headspace. Because having to switch gears, if you have a meeting on Monday, morning, and then something on Tuesday night, and all over the place, your brain never has a chance to get into a groove. And so it's almost always reactionary. And so you create these, like, I don't know, it's not going to sound right, but like zones of flow, right? Like where you're in the zone during this period because you've purposely booked those things together. And so, like, I don't know about you, but like if I do a call like this and then I go into another one, I leave and go in with that kind of same energy, and my brain's fully online and ready to go, versus if I have to do this, and then if I have to switch to doing emails, and if I have to switch to doing this other thing, like my brain can't get into a good rhythm. And so it sounds like you've kind of done that, where you've protected that rhythm that that you need.
Well, I mean, that's, yeah, Dr. Gloria Mark, right? That's her book Attention Span, but we interviewed her as well. I think that one's live, isn't it? If you search back, yeah, I think if you search back Gloria Mark, professor in focus in at, what is it, University of California, Caltech, I think. Maybe I'm wrong, but a lot of her research is into task switching. And what they've discovered is that we have mental schemas. So basically, your brain creates this firing pattern of neurons, which she calls a mental schema. And when you start an activity, your brain almost like pulls up a blueprint, for lack of a better term. Obviously, it's not a blueprint, but like your brain pulls up a blueprint,
Yeah.
and that's the mental schema for how you complete that task or how you go about that task. And over time, as you do that thing more and more and more, your mental schema gets better and better and better and fires faster and becomes more efficient. But if you switch back from one task to another task, you have to pull up a new mental schema. And it takes, on average, about 20 minutes to switch mental schemas. So if you're focused on writing or you're focused on podcasting or interviewing or whatever it is, and you just go and check email or you go and check social media, what's happening is your brain is actually switching back and forth mental schemas. And it becomes unbelievably taxing on your system. That's where brain fog comes from. That's why at the end of the day, some days, if I do that, if I fall into those traps, which holy hell I do, I find that I'm exhausted at the end of the day. And when I'm exhausted mentally at the end of the day and I don't have the energy for my family at the end of the day, which I hate, it is very rarely it's the worst. And it's very rarely a matter of actually working more or harder or longer that day. Instead, it was working worse. And by worse, I mean I wasn't as focused. I switched tasks a lot more often. And as a result, it was more taxing on my system.
Mm-hmm.
And so by doing exactly what you're saying, Amber, like I do a 15-minute break in between calls. I don't do anything else.
Mm-hmm.
I go pee.
No.
I throw water on my face. I grab a drink. I might do something that's like a rote task. Dr. Mark actually makes a very interesting argument for rote tasks and things that consume us but don't require any of our mental energy, even down to like playing silly games on your phone, like a Candy Crush type
Mm-hmm.
game. For me, it's things like washing dishes or mowing the lawn or doing like light gardening stuff that doesn't take any thought. And she says if you're playing games, make sure you have a timer of when that's ending. But it's actually a great way to I can't remember exactly what she said. I'd have to read the book again to find this, but it's a great way to almost relax and without having to pull up like a new schema in between and keep your hands busy if you're that type of person. And so what I'll do sometimes in between calls is I'll just like do the dishes for 10 minutes. Right.
Yep.
And not think about anything else. Just think about doing the dishes.
Yep.
And I find that makes a big difference as opposed to like, oh, I'm just going to check my email right now.
Yep.
Yeah,
It's kind of like if you go to a run, that first mile, no matter how good of a runner you are, that first mile always sucks. But after you get past that first mile, like you do find that flow state, like it doesn't hurt as much and you kind of get into a rhythm. But if all of a sudden somebody pulled you right after that first mile, it's like, okay, now go ride your bike for 15 minutes. That first 15 minutes fucking sucks. Okay, I'm gonna pull you again. And so you keep hitting that first mile feeling of everything sucks. It's all painful. And so that's what mentally is what that feels like to me when I have to do that.
It's a good analogy.
Protect my time for
That's
it.
a great analogy of the jogging. I believe it's a soft J. No, that's a good analogy.
It would definitely be jogging for me, not running.
Yeah, it would definitely be. I don't move fast. It would definitely be jogging. But that's a good analogy of like once you're into it, you find that you can go longer and harder, and actually you're energized by it. But it's the switching on and off that becomes difficult. Well, that's fascinating. I think that there's a lot there of when you are one of the biggest benefits of this is that it helps you reassess your schedule and reprioritize and restart and assessing, what felt good, where did I have resistance, how can I be proactive with this versus reactionary and get into those zones of flow. I think the idea with the mental schema and the attention is a good thing to keep in mind as well.
And it's such a good excuse too. Like if you're someone who has trouble saying no to things,
Hmm.
like then you can just blame your schedule. Like it doesn't fit in my schedule because it's true. You've literally built your schedule a certain way. So like if like for people pleasers like me, where it's like, okay, I need an excuse to be like to kindly say no because I don't feel good about saying it for whatever reason. It doesn't fit into my schedule. I'm sorry, and then people are like, oh, okay, makes sense, you know.
Hmm.
Um, so I like that aspect too from a trying when you get requests.
Yeah, knowing that doesn't fit right now. And then
Mm-hmm.
I call it the grass is greener fallacy. But
Mm-hmm.
the example that I thought of here is, I mean, we love our home in Toronto. It's wonderful in every sense of the word. It's wonderful. We're a 5 minute walk from my parents. We're a 7 minute walk from my sister. We're in a great neighborhood. Lots of old trees, which I love. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there's a river close by. We can bring a stand up paddleboard down. I can bike everywhere I want to go. Like it's perfect in every sense of the word for me. But I think about that house, and I know that I could live in the exact same house that I'm living now, in the exact same situation as I'm living right now, and not have experienced living in so many different places, and I wouldn't appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. 100%.
We could, we wouldn't be satisfied. So it's not about the space or the location. And even it's not about the partner. I mean, I was the second person that Allison ever dated. I was the second person she kissed. She was 26 years old. She dated somebody for 10 years before me. And we were together for about a year. And then we split up for 8 months. And we split up for 8 months mostly because I needed to figure out my shit. I needed to figure out why she was so special and I was just stupid. But we look back on that time and we didn't know it at the time. But if we did not have that break about a year into our relationship, I don't think we would be together today. Because we both needed something from that. I needed to get out of my idiotic single personal trainer mentality and figure out that I'd met the most amazing woman in the world and appreciate that. And she needed to date other people. Like she needed to experience what it was like to be single. When it came to buy a house, we had already lived in all over the world in different experiences and different types of locations. But even and so that's great, but I realize that that might not be possible for everybody. But before we bought a house, we rented a home. It was a second story of a house, and it was two different condos. And there were a couple different areas that we thought that we might want to live in. And we rented a place for a month or 2 months in each area, and we lived there to experience
Yeah.
what it was like living in that location. See what our flow is, see what our daily life flow is. And that way, when it got to the point where it was time for us to buy a house, the grass wasn't greener anymore
Yeah.
because we knew what would make us happy, because we had experienced other stuff to know what would make us happy, as opposed to making that decision very, very young. And then, even if it's the right decision for you, would you know it? Would you know it?
Well, it's like with any product or service, right? Like you need a point of reference in order to see the value, right? And so if you have no point of reference, there's no way for you to truly value it. Even
Mm.
if you do have the quote unquote best thing, you don't have anything to compare it to. So I think it all kind of comes back to you have to gather that data so you can create that point of reference so you can actually value what you have. I was lucky because I grew up in the military. We moved every 2 to 3
You
years.
moved,
I've
yeah.
lived all over the country. And so like when we got here, we're like, okay, done. Like
Well, and
this is
you
by
even
far the
knew
best
it.
place we've ever lived.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
we
even
knew
even like
without
when you lived
question.
in Arizona, like you knew that you weren't going to like it there, and you were right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I
Yep. I
remember
mean,
you
I'd already
talking
lived
about
there
the
before,
snake.
but yeah.
I remember you talking about the
Oh
snake in the
God, the
backyard.
snake. Oh my God, yeah. Killing it with a tornado ball. That is going to be a memory. And I have a terrible memory, but that will live in my brain of my ex taking, I don't know if you know what a tornado ball is, but a medicine ball on the end of a rope,
Yeah.
swinging it around and like slamming it down like a
Jesus.
sledgehammer to kill that snake.
Oh
It's
God.
quite funny after.
I mean, I've had to take care of a fair amount of snakes across Mexico and Nicaragua and Costa Rica, but
Yeah.
fortunately, it's always been safe enough that I've been able to basically like pick them up with a
No.
stick and like toss them back into the
Yeah.
jungle. But
Yeah.
if
He
they're
was a
like
little
coming into
aggressive.
my
He was
house with
not,
my kid, yeah,
yeah, it was a problem. Yeah.
yeah, no, these are
Not good.
different. Even the scorpion, I was able to
But yeah, I mean,
catch it and toss it. I didn't have to kill it, fortunately, but I mean, I would have if I had to. But
yeah, I'm trying not to.
and then I mean, so this is why I think that this idea is interesting, because another aspect of it is time with loved ones, and time passes quickly if we're not careful. There's the scary Wait But Why article, the famous article about really documents like how much time we have left with our parents by the time that we move out of the house at 18. It's like by the time you're 18 years old, you've used up 85% of your parents. If you actually think about it, if you live like far away from your parents and you maybe go home, if you're American, for like Thanksgiving, let's say, uh, you know, you don't necessarily go home for Thanksgiving every year, that type of thing. It's like, well, you actually only have like 6 or 7 or 8 Thanksgivings left ever with your parents.
Mm-hmm.
You start to think about it in those respects, and it gets scary, man. Jim Shields, who was also we interviewed, it just went live. I think his stuff is great. It, talks about 18 summers. How you have 18 summers with your kids, use them.
Yep.
And part of this, to me, is, of course, family is a major aspect of this kind of philosophy of this triad, and that's also like parents, loved ones, but also just like good friends. And figuring out a way is part of this model to schedule in time with them. And the way that I do it, set aside time for it, is I will actually celebrate process wins, and I'll schedule an experience to share in advance to celebrate a process win in something that I'm doing professionally. And so I'll give you an example from the book, from the Obvious Choice book. The day after the first draft of the book was submitted, we all went, our entire family went to Ometepe, which is a 2 volcano island in Nicaragua. And so my mother-in-law, Allison, our 2 kids, and our nanny, we all took a cab and a boat and rented an ATV and a car and explored this incredible island. We actually got stuck there an extra day, so 4 nights, because the water was too high. We couldn't take the boat back. When I submitted the manuscript, so the first draft goes out, right? You make some changes. When I submitted the manuscript, the day after the manuscript was due, I left for Oaxaca City with my dad. And then I got the manuscript.
Didn't you bring Calvin too?
No. Calvin and
Oh,
I,
got
so I did a daddy son trip to Oaxaca City with Calvin last year. And then this year I did a daddy son trip with my dad to Oaxaca City, which was kind of fun.
It's like, I know you went with him. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when I fully submitted, so manuscript goes out and there was not a lot of changes, I mean, fortunately, but then I went through it like once more, really, really detailed. And when I fully submitted the full for like acceptance, the full manuscript for acceptance, 2 days after that, Allison and I took a 2-night getaway to Quimixto, which is like an area here. And so every step of the way, there was a shared experience with somebody that I love that was an all-in experience, away from work, away from social media, away from everything, to celebrate a process win. It wasn't a financial win. It wasn't whatever. And I think that's a major part of it, is how do you, like, for ambitious people, how do you get over that idea of how do you get over that idea of like it's okay to take time away now? And it's this idea of guilt, feeling that we should be doing one thing while focusing on another. And even there's guilt, like, for people who own a business, like, put your hand up if you ever feel this way. When you're not working on your business and with your family, which is what you work so hard for, you feel guilty you're not working on your business. Okay.
Lift my legs if I can flexible.
When you're when you're working on your business really hard, even if it's going well and you're not with your family, do you feel guilty that you're not with your family? Like, and so how do you mitigate those two? Like there's more, but I won't get into it. I don't know, Amber. Like, I think there's something here. Like, I think it all falls
Yeah,
under
I
the
think
same
especially.
theme and umbrella. No.
Yeah, I mean, definitely need to find like the snippet to the create the actual umbrella name or phrase, but yeah, 100%. And I like that it feels more actionable compared to like conventional things, which feel almost like
So much of conventional
they're
self-help
annoying.
and time management and productivity stuff
Yeah.
is so
Like,
ridiculous to me. It's like, oh, so I got to use this app or make this list to mask the effects or put a band-aid over the effects that literally those sister companies have created. Like, it's often the same guy. Like, he created the thing that made your life miserable, and then he felt bad and created another company in Silicon Valley to help you better organize the overwhelming amount of things you feel like you don't need to do that you don't need to do. And like, it's just layering on more tech to put band-aids on the same problems or figuring out how to do more. And I'm like, I'm sitting here and I'm like, how do I do less better?
it's almost like sorry, I like my brain was like that's not the right word. Nope, that's not the right word. Nope, that's not the right word. It's periodization. Like that's what, we're taught to do, as a
Mm.
personal trainer is to do periodization. It's like applying that principle but like to your life. That's where my brain went.
The word
Took
that
a
the
minute.
word that came up to me, the word that came to my mind as we were talking and as you were just the last little bit is the word seasons.
Mhm.
Like, to me, that's the theme. Is evolution from an evolutionary standpoint, we evolved to live with seasons. Even like hunter-gatherer societies, there are seasons that are busier and going out and hunting and getting nuts and seeds and whatever. And then the winters were more family oriented. I mean, they really were. You're home more. You're
Mm-hmm.
and
Didn't have a choice.
you didn't have a choice, but that's also kind of how we evolved, isn't it?
No. Well, I mean, that's such a term that we use a lot. Like, this is a season of your life, right? And so, like, in the season of my life right now, it's obviously super focused on Nate and, X, Y, and Z. But then I'll go into a new season of life, and so
Yeah.
it's still taking that same principle and running with it.
Does that resonate? That word seasons?
It does, because it's something that's familiar already and
Yeah.
is something that's easy to grasp concept wise. It doesn't require a whole lot of thought to. No, the only difference is it's purposeful, right? So it's like about creating seasons versus reacting to outside seasons, if that makes sense. Um, that's the only kind of difference to me. But
Mm.
yeah.
Creating seasons. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else that any reactions? Um, I mean, this is it's. I'm trying to think of not just a book that I could write. I'm thinking of books that I
Mm-hmm.
seem to be very uniquely suited to write. Things where I have collected such a almost unparalleled like amount of experience around a thing some of this for sure. I'm going to look at sociological research. I'm going to look at anthropological research. I'm going to look at what other um, writers about these types of topics are talking about for sure. But the coaching thing, it's like, okay, I feel like I've been successfully running large and worked with large coaching businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Not the longest out of anybody out there, but like on par,
Up there.
up there.
Yeah.
And I mean, the same with this, like 10 plus years of experience where it's been a major part of my life. And originally it's like, oh, I'm going to write a book about travel. I'm going to write a book about travel with family. Oh, I think that that's getting a second. But why do we do it? Like, why do we do it? Like, that could be like the stories that are told, sure. But why do we do
Yeah.
it? Why do I really do it? Is it chasing sunlight? No, I mean, being able to be active all year round, sure. But it's so much deeper than that. And
Yeah.
and I was like, man, this is friendships. This is family. This is work. This is just constantly figuring out my place and how I want to do these things uniquely for me. And most of all, being okay with the trade-off that is inevitably involves.
No.
Knowing that that's not for everybody.
Well, and it's a lot of it's creating value is what you're doing, right? Instead of just sitting like a bump on a log, right? You're creating value not just in experiences, but in your relationships and in your work and at home. Um, and so I think that purposely doing that, creating value, so that way you're more active in
Mm-hmm.
your life, and more present in that. Versus just kind of being stuck on autopilot. So that's kind of what it feels like, is like getting out of autopilot so that way you can enjoy and value what you do have instead of
Yeah, that
feeling a
word
lot of
autopilot's
FOMO
a good
or
one. If you are looking for another episode to listen to, check out episode 187 with Dr. Gloria Mark, Boosting Productivity with Well-Being. Dr. Gloria Mark is a professor at Caltech in informatics, specializing on focus and attention and how we can better focus and keep our attention in an age of technology. She's one of the leading researchers in the world on that. And this was just a fun conversation with her. I love, love, love her work. So dig into
she's
that
great.
one, episode 187. Enjoy. Thanks for listening here.